Death is a universal experience we are all bound to go through, and most likely the one thing in life we are all guaranteed. We start losing family members as we get older. Unfortunately, small children up to the age of 3 are not disqualified from this tragedy. Despite each person being differently impacted, there is something so unique and fascinating that happens in the ages of development, more so in the crucial period of attachment. Attachment can very easily get messed with by small wrong moves that impact greatly the course of someone's life and future relationships. All of that to say that young children going through grief during these crucial stages will have a lasting impact on their life. Before I dive into the impacts of grief in children and their attachment, I will first explain the 4 different attachment styles and how they are formed. Then I will describe the impacts of grief on each attachment style. And lastly, I will close off with an anecdote of someone I know who lost their father at the young age of 6 months and the attachment style that they have shown. The 4 different attachment styles goes as follows: secure attachment, anxious attachment, avoidant attachment, and lastly, disorganized attachment. Secured attachment is best described as a child who is confident and trusting that the caregiver will return if they have left. The child has a sense of security that they are loved enough and the caregiver will always love them. Confidence and stability within themselves, as these children are also more likely to have mastered Erik Erikson's stage of development, trust versus mistrust. A child can develop this attachment with the help of the caregiver. Consistency is key in ensuring that children know what to expect and what is coming exactly. When a young child is crying, parents give the child some time to cry, but also letting the child know mommy or daddy is here for you. This allows children to develop their sense of emotional control and self-soothe while knowing they can fall back on caregivers for additional support. As this child grows and matures, this type of attachment is best for healthy relationships down the road and loving themselves, but also being able to regulate emotions. Anxious attachment. A child who has this type of attachment style is often worrying about the reliability of the relationship, if they can trust that caregiver will love them, or even if they are lovable enough. Probably the saddest form of attachment there is. Children with this attachment style are often more times than not worrying that anyone in their lives will end up abandoning them. Children develop this attachment from the caregiver being very unstable and reacting to the child's emotions. Once the parent is supportive and letting the child express emotions, and the next, the parent is dismissing the child's emotions altogether. Children at that young of an age will become confused as to if it's okay to show emotions. Them showing emotion doesn't allow them to develop that emotional regulation which would be detrimental during grief and loss. As children with this attachment style grow up, they will be more closed off to love from other relationships. Avoidant attachment. Children with avoidant attachment styles often are seen as the do-it-yourself children. They very rarely ask for help from caregivers and are often doing things by themselves, as they have learned caregivers are not going to be there to fall on. Most likely keep emotions to themselves as a way to distance themselves from caregivers. More often than not, this child's caregiver was emotionally unavailable, and from that young of an age, the child had to quickly learn that parents are not going to be there. This attachment style is also not healthy for intimate relationship, as they are unable to let others love them. This can be seen as a good thing in grief, but ultimately is very much bad for the long term. And lastly, we have disorganized. These types of children are the ones who you cannot distinguish if they need comfort from their caregivers. The confusion stems from the caregiver, who is more often than not unpredictable and not easy to tell their next reaction. Someone would describe it as walking on eggshells. It's difficult to learn emotional regulation when your senses are heightened, to stay on high alert for the behavior of your caregiver. This attachment is very much sad, but probably the worst one. Children don't necessarily master trust versus mistrust, hence the confusion. They do not know that their caregiver will attend to them. It's often seen in cases where abuse is involved. Even though young children may not fully remember the abuse, attachment is built from age regardless of memory. Now that we know the 4 different attachment styles, we can move on to how each attachment style is able to handle grief. While each person going through grief will act differently, children who are too young to understand the concept of death will have a more difficult time. Before the age of 3, children do not have the capability to comprehend that death is permanent and the caregiver or parent they have just lost will no longer be there or ever come back. The brain has also not started to form memories which would allow the child to remember their figure. They are also still in the phase of magical thinking, making them think that the deceased member is going to come back, unable to comprehend that death is not reversible. Secure attachment children are the most properly prepared to handle grief. It's not something I would ever wish upon someone. However, when a child is secure, they can learn how to get help and cry to the other parent over the loss. Since they have mastered emotional regulation, they can learn methods on remembering the deceased parent while learning to move on with their lives. More likely than not, these children will grow up with emotional maturity and a greater appreciation for the loved ones in their lives. They will be able to handle grief down the road more properly as they gain skills going through the loss of their parent. When a child who is securely attached goes through a grief, they are able to know that nothing they will go through is as difficult as loss. That loss and grief is the most difficult thing they will go through in their lives, so there isn't anything they won't be able to handle. Children with anxious attachment end up having an all-around more difficult experience dealing with grief as they have the anxiety that maybe something was their fault. In a child's perspective, the loss of their parent can make them think they were a bad child that caused their parents' death. In an article written by Hal Shorey in Psychology Today, Attachment Styles and Reactions to Grief and Loss states, "We should expect those who have anxious, preoccupied styles will be heavily impacted by loss and that associated negative feelings will last longer. This implies that those who have this attachment are the ones that struggle most in times of loss." Grief is not a competition, yet we will need to watch out for children who experience loss and have this attachment style, especially during such crucial periods of their lives. Those who have a dismissive attachment style may make themselves appear fine on the outside, while on the inside they may be deeply struggling. In an article written by Hal Shorey in Psychology Today, Attachment Styles and Reactions to Grief and Loss states, dismissive or avoidant people in particular are likely to report less post-traumatic growth after the death of a loved one. They tend to suppress their negative feelings and convert those negative emotions, especially in young children. Even kids can start picking up on hiding their emotions and swallowing the painful pill of the loss and grief of their caregiver. Even if they don't fully understand, the lack of emotional regulation will make it difficult for them to know when crying is okay or that any emotion they feel is absolutely normal. Again, these type of children are created from unpredictable parents, so the parent may not even show sorrow themselves, leading to the child being even more confused. Disorganized attachment styles in children is the most difficult one. All of the 3 different attachments are immensely difficult other than secure attachment. Because they are created by past trauma, they might not even face the grief. To the outside, it may look like they have it all figured out, but we have to remember that these are small children we're talking about. If they are unable to learn emotional regulation and have this type of attachment style, then crying over the death of the parent might not even be in their list of things. In the same article, it states, this is because the new loss event may trigger feelings and thoughts related to the unresolved losses from the past. This would be horrible down the road if the child is a bit older to remember the death of their parent. This attachment style by itself is bad enough, then you add the innocence of a child and you get a very sad mix. Now that we have looked at how each attachment style will react to grief, it's only right that I give an anecdote of someone I know who lost their father at 6 months old, and the attachment style they have now. When my cousin Sohail was just 6 months old, his father unexpectedly passed away. From the time he was born, he had been a daddy's boy, so right from the get-go, he was more attached to his father. Upon the unexpected death of his father, he started to become fussy and kept calling for dad, completely unaware of the fact that his father won't ever be back again. He grew up a bit older and started to understand that his father had passed away when he was just a baby. That's when he started developing the anxious attachment style. His anxious attachment started showing through being overprotective over his mom and making sure he did absolutely everything possible to ensure that she is healthy. The fear of losing his mother was strong. He had already lost his father. He can't lose anyone else. Even when he started school, his anxiety for losing friends also became evident. So what's the takeaway from all of this? That grief and loss at an early age can have a detrimental effect on children and their future relationships. Each style has its own pros and cons. One fact remains the same. If any child is to experience the death of their loved one, having a secured attachment style is crucial for a more stable relationship down the road. Surely one parent figure will be missing for a while or forever, but the lessons the child will take away will last them a lifetime. They have full ability to handle loss even at that young of an age. Other attachment styles are more difficult to predict the outcome of the child's grief. However, the three are unhealthy, unfortunately. The way each child develops an attachment is heavily reliant on how the parent behaves. They are the adults making decisions for kids, and each decision is slowly creating the next generation.